joining us now. So it's morning from Tim there. Hi, Tim. Morning, everyone, and welcome to the Nurture channel on Pro Landscaper TV. I'd like to start by introducing our next debate, where our very own Jim Wilkinson will be hosting a panel made up of Brian Herbert, Jake Catling, and Mark Youd to debate porcelain paving. It'll be recorded and streamed live on Tuesday, 23rd of February at the usual time of 10 AM. Now to this session. This is the first edition of the Nurture channel on Pro Landscaper TV, where our focus will be on UK horticulture, plant production, and aspects of professional horticulture. I'll be your host for these monthly sessions. My name is Lewis Normand, and I'm the sales manager at the family-owned wholesale plant grower based in Rugby, Warwickshire, Bernard's Nurseries. I'm also a monthly contributor to Pro Landscaper magazine, as well as some other trade and retail magazines looking at horticulture and garden design. Joining me today in the follow-up to a November 2020 talk at Futurescape virtual event are four powerhouses of the UK horticultural wholesale scene. You like that? Good, good. I thought powerhouses was the best way of describing you all. We're going to be looking at the current state of UK horticulture in 2021 and the factors affecting it. So all that remains really is for me to welcome Mark Straver from Hortus Loci, Robert Crowder from Crowder's Nurseries, Richard McKenna from Provender Nurseries, and Steve McCurdy from Majestic Trees. Over the next hour, we're going to have, I'm sure, some interesting discussion on where we're at and where we're headed in terms of UK horticulture. Welcome, gentlemen. Perhaps you could give us a brief introduction to what each of you do, and then we can start with some questions. If I can start with Mark, please.
Morning. Well, thank you very much for having me, Lewis. Well, I run a company called Hortus Loci, along with my business partner, Robin Wallace. And we're based in Hook in Hampshire. And the main part of our business is looking after landscape architects. We're trying to provide a one-stop shop for landscape architects. So most of the work we do is private. We also have a retail side to the business too, and a coffee shop, which will be opening again, hopefully very soon. So in a nutshell, that's what we do.
Lovely, thank you. Robert, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, Lewis, and good morning anybody else that happens to be watching. So I'm Robert Crowder from Crowder's Nurseries, based in Lincolnshire. I'm the 7th generation of a very long-standing nursery business. And we grow trees, plants, hedging plants, hardy nursery stock, in herbaceous plants as well. So the whole range for commercial landscapers in the main, but also private garden contractors as well. And we supply those all over the UK, and we're involved in some of the biggest and most prestigious infrastructure projects, as well as housing projects. And we've quite famously got a contract for HS2 to provide them with 7 million trees. And so, yeah, that's what we do, mostly to the commercial landscape market. Thank you.
Richard.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Richard McKenna from Provender Nurseries. We are based in Kent, Garden of England. We supply our raft of customers from small, medium to large. We offer a good range of plants and materials, and we love what we do.
Oh, that was really succinct. You obviously took the memo about quick answers to heart. Steve McCurdy, over to you.
I'm Steve McCurdy, Majestic Trees, and thank you very much for having me on this today, and looking forward to this debate. We grow specimen trees from 12-14 up to meter girth in air pots, and we ship nationwide with our own fleet of trucks, and we work a lot with the trade, including delivery to tree pit service a lot of people like. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. If anybody has any questions that they want to ask, they can ask if they're on Zoom via the chat. The likelihood is, because this is a big subject and we all have a lot to say on it, that there won't be many questions asked. I do have one that was sent in yesterday, which I think is worth discussing a little further down the line. So I'll ask that later on. But we're live on Instagram, Facebook Live, and through the Zoom recording. You can also catch up with it later on if you feel you want to watch it again. It'll be recorded and presented on YouTube as well. So if I start then, gents, when we last met virtually in November, we didn't have a deal. We were not sure whether we were going to get a deal with Europe. We managed a last minute deal. Do you think it was of value to UK horticulture? And where would you have preferred to have seen it changes made? I'll start with Steve because he's on the screen for me.
Well, we could debate this one for hours.
We're not going to. We're only on for an
I
hour.
know, but you know, the thing is, I think we should today leave totally alone whether we vote for Brexit or against
Absolutely.
Brexit. There's no point going down that road. But I think we need to look at, you know, the positive and negatives. And so far, there was definitely some negatives, no question. I mean, we all hate change. Some of us hate change more than others, you know, and some of us just would rather it being the simple way it was before. Biosecurity was a serious problem before. There's no question that this could potentially improve biosecurity, but it's also thrown up all sorts of obstacles to importing and making things difficult. And there's a lot of people don't know what they're doing. I mean, you could argue maybe some of us don't know everything what we're doing. But there's, you know, I had a truck stuck at the port for 10 hours last week, and they still won't tell us why it was stuck there for 10 hours, but they claimed they wanted the plant code supposedly for a third world plant import on the blessed thing, which it wasn't, it was from Holland. So there's things like that where people make mistakes and, you know, cause problems, you know what I mean? And there's agents don't know how to do peach. Peach doesn't work properly all the time. There's all sorts of, I mean, I'm sure my colleagues have got lots more horror stories than me. I had a trailer in on the 4th, 5th of January overnight, and it came in absolutely perfect. But, you know, last week was the first time I had a really bad problem. So I'm sure my colleagues have other stories.
Do you feel that these are teething problems and that we'll get beyond them reasonably quickly?
It depends how pragmatic, you know, the EU is. I mean, I think truthfully, it's a bit like a divorce right now where they're hell-bent on trying to make us regret leaving and trying to make sure that everybody else in the EU wouldn't consider leaving. So there's a lot of that going on, especially the Northern Ireland problem. I mean, nothing was supposed to change for 90 days, and they enforced it on the first day. And you can't even ship a piece of plant machinery to Ireland or Northern Ireland right now, or to the continent, because it might have a speck of soil on it. So I mean, there's some ridiculous things like that they're enforcing. So, but I think overall, people will start being more sensible long term, and you know, especially if it starts costing them as well, that they'll start looking at, you know, a better solution.
Yeah, thank you. Mark, over to you with the same question. Are we just experiencing teething problems, or are there longer term issues?
I hope most of it is teething problems, to be honest. I mean, we're in much the same as Steve. We've had 3 or 4 lorries in now since the new year, which is much more reassuring now. And most of it has gone fairly smoothly. I mean, what I did do is when we had we had some problem with a couple of lorries from Germany, where really people were actually, I think it's like everything else, you know, as Steve just quite rightly said, everyone's scared of change, and I think it's changed for everybody. There was a couple of problems which arose in Germany, and I thought, well, rather than mess about it, I didn't know enough about the problems which were suddenly appearing. So I emailed Nicola Spence directly, and she was incredibly helpful. So within about an hour later, she'd come back with what the rights and the wrongs were, which I just forwarded on to the German nurseries, and within 24 hours, the problem was solved. So I think for the minute, I think we've all decided that what we need to do is you know, we're not going to expect to get a lorry in a week or 10 days after we've ordered the plants. We know it's going to be more like 3 to 4 weeks. And I think that's the route we've taken. We said, look, it's going to be slower. We're having to fill lorries in each individual nurseries, which for, you know, if it's for bigger nurseries, that's fine. But where we all deal with some smaller specialist nurseries, a bit like ourselves, you know, you've got to fill that lorry first, and it's just a question of juggling stuff around and being a bit more patient. But I'm very hopeful that it is teething problems. I mean, we're only 6 weeks in, and we've all managed to get lorries across one way or another. So I'm very hopeful that, you know, it's still going to be a little bit slower, of course it is, but I would suspect that, you know, hopefully by the middle of March we'll all be in a much better place.
Do you think your customers are receptive to waiting longer? And are they? Yes,
I think that's our job. I think we just got to let people know right at the beginning that, you know, we're not going to be all doom and gloom, but we just got to, you know, to tell them that. Also, we all stocked up as best we could last year with as much as we can. And I think on the other side, you know, on the flip side, I think what's really key is to try and encourage all our customers to come and see us.
Yeah.
We've got a coffee shop, so for that reason, it's worth coming in and letting people actually have a look around the nursery and try, rather than just make their lists up as they always have done, which of course is, you know, what they want is to come in and try and make their list with what we've got. I mean, we've got a 17-acre nursery. We've always got huge amounts of stock on the site. It's just, you know, and, as we all know, if we had to put together 100 gardens from the stock we've got, we'd manage that quite easily. So I think it's a bit of both, really. I think it's trying to manage expectations with the delays, which I'm sure will get better, and also trying to get people down to the nursery and encourage people to have a look around and buy what we've got, you know, and also steer people in the right direction. You know, you can always say, look, you know, we've got a time slot for each plant. You might be after a tree, you might be after, try and help along the way rather than wait for a problem to arise as such.
Yep, good points. Thank you. Robert, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Lewis. So I remember in this discussion in November suggesting that post-Brexit, we would have to face delays of 24 to 48 hours in deliveries coming in from our suppliers the other side of the channel. That was met with certain skepticism by other members of this panel. But in fact, I'd like to say that my forecast was pretty spot on. And the delays are not coming through the ports. I mean, we must have imported 15 to 20 truckloads since the 1st of January. And most of them arrive on our nursery within 2 to 4 hours of the time that we would have expected pre-Brexit. I think the big difference is that we have to give our suppliers 24 hours more notice than we did pre-Brexit so that they can get the certifications in place and the phytosanitary certificates. So that's the 24 hours. And so we found that pretty smooth. Now, as long as your own administration is all in order and that you get your paperwork correct and all the entries entered into the peach system correctly, you find that you will get what's called a green light prior to the lorry arriving at the port. And provided that you've got a green light, that means that all your documentation is correct. Then that lorry will sail through the port and on its way to you. So that's been our experience. It's been pretty good. The one negative is deliveries to Northern Ireland, as everybody knows. Now, we have a lot of business in Northern Ireland, and specifically we have a contract for 1820 root ball trees, about 2,000 a year into Northern Ireland. And we knew that was going to stop on the 1st of January. So we sent 5 truckloads in the last 10 days before Christmas to Northern Ireland of root ball trees, and we've not been able to send any since. So that's a big loss of business, which is, as I say, I call it an unintended consequence of Brexit. It's the Northern Ireland Protocol that's caused that, and I do hope, sincerely, that that's going to be resolved very, very quickly. But there's no sign of it just yet.
No. Richard, thoughts, please. Your mic, I don't think, is on.
Sorry, to go back to the original question about has the deal changed anything? I don't think the deal changed anything. I think everything that we lined up in advance is what we got. I think we knew there's going to be huge changes to phytosanitary and much more control, and I think we got all that. The paperwork, I think, is what we were expecting. Some of the continental suppliers are playing catch up on getting their systems in place. I think the UK might have been more advanced and some of the continental suppliers. And it's interesting to see that different countries are interpreting the rules differently, which is causing some confusion about importing into the UK. But we are where we are. We're all learning a new system, and change can be difficult and change can be slow. But I think as time goes on, we will adapt, we will get on top of it, and systems will smooth out, and the bugs that are in the system, the gremlins, will hopefully disappear. So we need time to implement the change.
Yeah, I think it's the biggest problem that most would argue is that it happens overnight. And although we had planned and got, as you say, quite rightly, Richard, we planned and were delivered upon what we expected, the teething problems and everyone getting up to speed on both sides of the English Channel, that really has made any delays and problems that we're experiencing as we're finding out, rather than things that were predicted. They're evolving over time. I think that's, I mean, we don't want to be bogged down in Brexit, and we're making our best of it. In some ways, once we've got the administration better and more seamlessly put in place, is this an opportunity for us to trade outside of the EU as well with plants? What do you think, Richard?
Well, it's easier to trade with your neighbours.
Yeah.
Plants do not like traveling too far. There's a certain limitation. You can bring small unrooted cutting material, small material in from anywhere around the world, and much easier, but bigger stock, more mature stock that landscapers and designers need. Ideally needs to come from a relatively local source, or ideally within the UK where possible, but we don't grow everything in the UK, so there is a need to import.
I mean, one of the big areas where we've bought outside of the EU traditionally is in microprop material and very small material. It might not be that we're able to import or even export larger stock practically and cost effectively, but for example, Chinese peonies were always a big sort of market interest, and I don't know whether we're likely to see increased business. Robert, what do you think?
Certainly in the sectors that we're involved in, no. We don't import anything from outside the EU, and we've got no intentions of doing that. I think, for niche products, as you've mentioned, maybe, but that will be in very small volumes. And, the freight and shipping costs are the problem.
Yeah.
So, no, I don't think that's an issue.
Okay. Mark, any opportunities or issues with potential import from beyond the EU?
We have over the years messed around a little bit with bits and pieces like that. I mean, we get, I've always had this our hand thrown range of terracotta made in Turkey for many years actually, and that all worked really well. That gave us a good idea as to what to expect after Brexit, obviously. And but I've always found that people, when you were importing stuff from Turkey, I mean, it was pots, not plants anyway. But it worked very smoothly. The people, the people at the ports were incredibly helpful. So it wasn't the end of the world, but it was always messing around, and it wasn't particularly relevant to the business. It was just a nice thing to do. We have tried importing bits and pieces from China before, and I wasn't quite sure whether it was worth it. With the we've done the peony thing where most of them turn out to be the wrong colour, obviously. And bamboos over the years, but I think of course the other thing you've got is plants. Depending on the time of year, of course, is the time that plants can spend in the lorries. Like when I was in Turkey, I did have a look at some very nice nurseries over there. There was a landscape architect, a very keen landscape architect that had his own nursery, but and he had an amazing range of perennials too, in bigger pots, sort of 4 and 5 meter pots. But it was at least a 7-day trip in a lorry. So of course it was, if the plants were growing, that was too long, or getting towards too long. So it wasn't an area that we in particular that we'd be missing out on for the moment anyway. But obviously always keep an open eye on stuff. I mean, where we have had jobs, I've done where we've provided plants to Norway before now, and to Sweden. So you're half in, half out. It was it all worked well, and it was it wasn't a huge part of the business. It was almost not a bit of fun, but it was something to see if we could do it, and how it would work, and it did work very well. But otherwise, apart from that, I haven't got enough experience in that really, or need for the moment anyway.
Yeah. Steve, your product perhaps is too large for this to be a practical decision most of the time. But do you have anything to add to it?
No, I mean, I pretty much, it doesn't work for us, truthfully, to ship huge trees around the world. But, one thing I think is a big advantage to what's happened, and a positive, is virtual nurseries, which is, as us guys know, there's quite a lot of guys look at their bedrooms and have photographs of nurseries on the continent and claim it's their production. I mean, I've seen some amazing setups in virtual nurseries, and they've been eliminated overnight because it doesn't make sense for them to, have a fight for 1-2 trees to get them shipped direct, drop shipped direct like some were doing. So I think there's been a big improvement in biosecurity that way, which is obviously makes it that people buy the trees from or plant material from us instead.
So biosecurity is where we're all kind of thinking a great deal about at the moment. In fact, Richard, do you believe you're talking very shortly at a seminar looking at Xylella, aren't you? Where are we feeling in terms of the changes to biosecurity policies in the UK, and what do we need to look out for and be mindful of in this changed environment? Richard, over to you.
Okay, I'll try and make this as quick as I can. Biosecurity is really, really important in the UK. There's obviously plenty of pests and diseases have come in or coming into the country. I think a little bit of it is that the DEFRA, FAIRA and government agencies have been massively under-resourced probably the last 10 or 15 years. Now that a lot has come in or has got through the net, now we're playing catch up. So I do believe about 2-3 years ago when Nicola Spencer talked at a conference, she said it's about 124 inspectors in the country, and now I think it's about 400. So if there was 400 inspectors 15 years ago, we may not find ourselves in this situation. We do need to protect what we have for sure. There's no doubt about that. But the new phytosanitary controls is there to stop anything coming through the net, and it works absolutely fine where the industry vets it and polices it and does it correctly, and everybody who will want to do it will do it correctly. But regretfully, the weakness will be where people put plants in the back of their suitcase or back of their car, and none of that is checked. So the industry, the professionals will do it correctly and will pay for it to be done correctly, but that's only a proportion of the risk. And you know, if something goes wrong, it'll be the industry, regretfully, and it may not necessarily be the industry. So I think whatever is dealt out there has to be dealt evenly into all.
Yeah, agreed. Robert, what do you think on our biosecurity policies and where we're headed?
Yes, there is an opportunity now to tighten up our biosecurity as a country, and Rich has mentioned that we've increased the number of plant health inspectors, but also we've suffered from some knee-jerk reactions. If you remember, only 3 weeks ago, you know, there was a sudden ban on prunus being imported into the country without any notification or any discussion with the industry. Just overnight, a ban came in place. Now, prunus is a huge species, from hedging plants to big standard ornamental, big ornamental trees. So anyway, that was quickly ironed out within a few days, and the ban was released. So my message is, look, let's have some consultation with the industry prior to any of these changes in our biosecurity procedures. It's absolutely vital to all of us to work together on biosecurity. I think the thing from our perspective is that as a nursery business, we're somewhat unique actually, because we still propagate a lot of our own plants. Now that's a dying skill, sadly, within the UK, and a lot of nurseries now rely on propagators and buy all their young plants for growing on in their nursery. They don't actually start the whole process. So we propagate from seed, from cuttings, from bench grafting, which we're doing right now, field budding in the summer. So the full range of propagation, and that gives us much more control over our own biosecurity within our own nursery. Sure, yes, we do buy in from other plant propagators to supplement those items that either we don't have enough stock or we don't have the skills to grow ourselves, or the economy of scale to grow ourselves. So yes, of course we bring plants in, but I think we'll be looking to propagate more and more of our own in the future so that we can have control of our own destiny, and that puts us in a fairly unique position.
Yeah, that's really important, I think, and the idea that horticulture can grow in the UK as a consequence of the changes that we find ourselves in. In fact, there's a couple of questions that have been presented where we've been asked, are there opportunities for us to produce? Catherine Hathaway, they're asking, opportunities to produce more domestically rather than import. And that there's a suggestion that the Chinese are buying maybe 100,000 trees from the Netherlands each year, and is this impacting on UK supply? I'm sure Steve McCurdy's got some opinion on that.
I don't think the Chinese are buying trees this year, 100,000 plus. In the past few years they have. But this is what's crazy about it. You know, for the Dutch boys to ship those trees to Holland, to China, beg your pardon, they have to lift them bare root, number one. They have to pressure wash them perfectly clean. They have to go to a special facility where they get fumigated, and then they get stacked on a container and shipped to China. It's actually far, and the paperwork and the phytos, etc., all that they have to do too. So it's actually far, far more work to ship those trees to China than ship them to the UK. So you could argue there's a, you know, when it gets down to it, it'd be far simpler for them to continue business with us than ship them to China. But China was an opportunity a few years ago, and Turkey prior to that, where there's a lot of trees on the continent, and they didn't have enough, you know, the industry was so poor in relative terms that they were reducing production. Some guys went bust, and there was an opportunity to sell seconds, you know, often to third world and clear a lot of stock. They got good money for them in general, but obviously had a lot of costs to do it. But the problem we've got right now is because the market was so fabulous last year, and we think we had a great autumn, which we all did. But the truth of the matter, the continental boys, they had a fantastic spring, because they never shut the nurseries or garden centres. Everyone had to stay at home, but they could still go in the garden centre to buy their trees and plants to plant their gardens up in the spring. So they had fantastic sales through the whole spring and summer and autumn. And then we suddenly come into the market in a big hurry to buy loads of trailers, about 54 before Christmas, you know, in the autumn. And so we're rushing to get all our trees before Brexit because we don't know what it's going to be. And there's a massive shortage of stock now, which has driven prices up. You know, thankfully the pound has gone up to 114.50, where it was 109 before Christmas. So that has been a plus, which is actually saving us some money, but it's still, you know, problematic because some trees have doubled in price.
Yeah, price is an increasingly big factor in the sort of discussion on plants. We'll come over to it in a minute, I think. But Mark, what's your take on biosecurity? You've contacted Nicholas Spence directly and asked questions. Where are we with import of a wide range of plant materials?
I think everything is going. I mean, obviously, plant health is so important now. What we're doing as a company, what we're actually trying to do again with our, with our customers, is try and steer people away as well. So obviously, you've got in effect, the traffic light system of trees, or traffic light of stock to bring into the country, where you've got doesn't get anything or doesn't bring anything in, may do, and then certainly all needs checking. So again, the first thing we're trying to do is to steer people away from importing, or asking for stuff that is dangerous. It's been a long time coming too. I think it's all good for the biosecurity thing, and perhaps long overdue. I remember being in Germany 20 years ago and hearing talk of the oak processionary moss, and everyone was adamant then that it was far too cold for it to get anywhere near us. And of course, with global warming and everything else, that's the other area. It's all linked in as well to it all. So overall, we have all our. I think we have about 20 checks. We do find that our chap Rob Witham is a really good guy. He's incredibly helpful, and it's just really sticking to the rules and steering our customers along that way as well, and hoping that all that But as the guys have said before, I mean, the biggest problems is people sticking cuttings in their suitcases, it would appear, or even people, I remember the RHS was saying that the biggest problem they had was they used to encourage people to bring stuff with diseases on it to Wisley or to a show, so they can show people what they've got. And of course, all that too has long since stopped, thank goodness. So, I think there's all areas to consider, and also global warming generally, more problems that are coming our way. But equally, I don't know what you heard with the talk of Xylella now, that perhaps maybe Xylella with being so temperature sensitive can't come this far as well. But we've heard that line before. Need to be very careful. But we just we liaise non-stop and steer our customers away from anything that could be difficult. I think that's really the way.
Yeah, I think that as a any logical decision is made based on, you know, simple economics, and you don't want to be the bad guy. It might be unfortunate having to say no to a customer, but far better that than being the vector bringing in a problem.
Well, and also there's plenty of options too. I mean, you know, you might be able to say no to, no to an olive or what have you, but you know, there's options too. There's, for everything you say no to, there's another 4 or 5 things that you can say yes to. So yeah, it's not the end of the world.
And circling back to something you said earlier about trying to encourage people to buy what's on the floor. I mean,
yes,
it relates to not just what you purchased in advance of Brexit, but also what you're producing and the relationship you've got with other British growers. How important do we feel the British grower is now to our purchasing?
Is that for me, Lewis?
Yeah, start with you, Mark. Yeah, please.
Yeah, well, it's really important. I mean, we do our best to, to buy British all the time where we can, but which all sounds marvellous. But as we well know, that there's still enormous gaps. So I think but we've always done that anyway to a degree. You start by sending your list off to people you think you might have stuff, but equally, I know for the last 20 years, much like Steve and everyone else, I've been on an aeroplane every 2 weeks in a different country. Looking at stuff that we can't find here, and of course, so it sounds great, but we do buy British where we can, and it is important to do that as much as we can, of course. But we need to be realistic and know that there is enormous gaps that we can't fill in the UK at the moment. Richard,
do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do to a point. We absolutely, we've always tried to source local material. If it can be a mile down the road or 10 miles down the road, we'd rather go there first. But as rightly said, we have to import material that we cannot be grown efficiently or productively in the UK. And I just don't see UK horticulture quadrupling overnight, producing X amount more stock overnight to fulfill the market, because that's just not viable. The money is not there, the support is not there. So, there is a need to import, but what we import and how we import it, it will be done according to the law, following the rules, and making sure it's clean and tidy. But with all due respect, commercial productive nurseries or nurseries who care have been doing that anyway. Yeah. So, I would like to think the rules we're doing now is no different than we've been doing for years and years and years. It's just now there's just more checking and more vetting going on. So you could argue nothing has really changed except just the paperwork and the checking has. Nurseries who care about UK horticulture do not want to import any problems. Why would we? We don't want to ruin our own industry. We care too much about our industry to ruin it. So, I think the industry has been, designers and landscapers and people that are the end users of plants have been very lucky to get what they want when they want. And I do think we may not be in a position to offer everything all the time to the spec they want under the short notice we've had. I think one of the biggest changes going forward is we're going to need time to source, time to find, and time to quarantine or isolate stock to get stock in. So when a customer wants it, it's available. I think people may have to get used to buying what's on the floor instead of what they may wish, as Mark said. I totally agree with that. And I actually think seeing what's available might be more important than seeing or telling landscape designers of what you actually want. There is a difference. So I think there might be a subtle change. I would like something 5 foot high, but I can only get 4 foot high, or there might have to be give and take to get the end result.
Yeah, absolutely. Robert, same question. Are we, and I think we also want to look at and think about, are we able to grow more in the UK to compensate if this is the case?
Yes, and I'm going to pick up on a point that Richard's made, and which is absolutely valid, about selling what we've got as opposed to selling what the customer asked for. And it also applies to the commercial market, because for the first time for many, many years, there have been shortages for commercial landscapers this season. And we spent a lot of time, our people have spent a huge amount of time talking to landscape contractors, talking to landscape architects and saying, look, we haven't got this, but we can supply that. And this has happened multiple times. on all sorts of schemes, from roadside planting schemes where seedlings and transplants have been desperately short, to bigger trees, which have been desperately short. I mean, Acer campestri you can't get for love or money. So rather than saying we can't supply, we've been saying, well, that's not available, but we have got this. So it works for the commercial market as well as the domestic market. So can UK horticulture increase its production to replace our reliance on imports? I think only to a limited extent. And the reason for that is mostly down to labour and skills. There is a shortage of labour and skills. We're currently recruiting. We are increasing our own production. We're taking on more land and we're expanding quite rapidly. But the limitation is labour and skills. I mean, we're recruiting 10 more people right now, 3 apprentices and the rest as nursery workers. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult. But actually, I do believe that now is the time, because there are so many people in other industries that have been furloughed for the last 10 months and may never have a job to go back to. So I think if we can sell our industry as one with a growing future, and I like that phrase, but it's true, and try and attract people from other industries, I think now we have a fantastic opportunity to do that. And I would like to see a coordinated campaign by the whole industry to attract these people who've sadly been out of work and probably haven't got work to go back to in the future. They need to think about a career change. So I think there's a great opportunity for us now to attract some talent into our industry. And if we can do that, then we can be more self-sufficient. But that's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just as an idea, how quickly do you think we can respond in a way where we can up the UK production sufficiently to reduce import requirements by maybe just 5 or 10%? How many years?
Well, I mean, you see, a lot of the product that we grow is years in production, and you can't suddenly increase that. The other thing that you have to bear in mind is also that we talked about trees to China and what impact that would have on the supply throughout Europe. Actually, the most important fact to the supply of trees and shrubs into the UK market is what's happening in Germany. Germany is by far the biggest market for nursery stock in the whole of Europe. And of course, if demand in Germany is good, then that soaks up a lot of the product in Europe, which might otherwise have found its way to the UK. And this year, demand in Germany and other EU member states has been incredibly strong. That coupled with importing stock pre-Brexit into the UK, a lot of growers and suppliers have massively increased their stock holding because of fears of what might happen post 1st of January. And so that coupled with the huge demand in Europe is causing the shortages that we're now currently seeing. And the shortages are in the more mature plants. It's very easy to build up stock of the small and younger plants quite quickly. So the seedling, transplant, hedging plants, you know, if the seed's available, we can build up stocks very quickly. 2-3 litre shrubs, we can build up stocks very quickly if they're propagating, and liner stock is available. But the bigger plants, it's not going to, that stock is not going to be replaced quickly. The bigger trees, the bigger shrubs, the bigger hedging plants, we're going to see shortages for the next 2 to 3 years, I would suggest.
Okay, great, thank you. Steve, as a man who does bigger trees, bigger shrubs, and bigger hedging plants as a speciality, are you going to be taking up all of the market supply in order to make sure that you don't lose out?
Well, I mean, I'm well stocked now, but Robert is actually absolutely right that, you know, some of the stock that we have in the nursery, the youngest will be 4 years, but some of them are 20, 25 years old, or even 30 years. I mean, you can't just get the mold out and send it to have an extra production run, running it night shift and weekends just to churn it out. It has to grow, and you have to, you know, grow from seed. You know, you have to graft it, all these different things, and prune it, all these many years. So there's no doubt. I mean, I think we'll likely end up seeing prices going back on big trees back to where they used to be 15 years ago before the financial crisis, because there's going to be a shortage of big trees and quality big trees. And Robert's absolutely right. But I think people, what they need to do, absolutely, we need to sell what we've got, but so that the designers and landscape contractors are not disappointed and feeling they've got egg on their face, they need to design the projects based on what is in the nurseries in the UK, what's available, because otherwise they're going to have to go back and they'll try to twist their arms. Or surely Mark, you could find it, or surely, you know, Robert, whatever, you can find it somewhere. But you know, if it's not out there, I mean, I had a job yesterday, 2,500, you know, a market I don't do, 810s they wanted. Well, trying to find 2,500 810s right now is actually very difficult too, because the European boys, they've sold more stock in before Christmas than they normally sell in a complete season. And so they've been buying all the little stock like crazy to replant their fields because they see a big future and they want to replant. And so there's a huge shortage on little stock as well as big stock. So make sure you design your project based on what you know you've got on the ground that you can put, and you know, and buy that stock early. Don't wait until you're almost about to plant it and hope it's still there, because it may not be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing, isn't it? We're not really sure where the shortages are going to be, but they're likely to be with older crops because they take that much longer to appear. Interesting idea. You know, there are a lot of building projects which are many years in the making, and plant allocation is invariably many minutes in the making at the very end of it. And we may have, you know, have to culture our plant specifiers into understanding time taken to actually get the plants produced, and we could produce more on a contract basis rather than supply on demand. I mean, Robert, obviously you do a good bit of that, and Mark, it'll segue nicely into a discussion that I think we need to have on show gardens. So Robert, what's your time frame for most big build works? HS2 obviously is one, but you do a number of these projects.
Yeah, we do. We've just picked up an order actually for 12,500 10-12 root board trees for delivery in 2028. Now, you know, well, that's an enlightened client.
Yeah.
That's an incredibly enlightened client. And there's also 125,000 seedlings and transplants within that order. But the key line was 12,500 root ball trees. Now, why did they come out to us so early? Because actually they know that their project is maturing in 2028, and they've done some early works planting and been incredibly disappointed by the quality of the stock that was delivered to them, not by us, I hasten to add. And so they decided that they weren't going to leave themselves open to that possibility again in the future. That's fantastic. There's another one we just picked up for delivery in 23, 24 for 250,000 hedging plants. We're finding more and more people are coming to us for these big infrastructure projects for advanced procurement for several reasons. One is to ensure that they get what they want rather than be left to the vagaries of the market at the time it comes around. But secondly, really importantly, is they want UK sourced and grown. So they want UK provenance stock. And that's for environmental and ecological reasons. But also it's the biosecurity reason as well. They want to ensure that they're not leaving their site open to biosecurity issues by doing last minute procurement and ending up with stock being imported from a country over which they've got no control of the growing processes. So that is an increasing trend, but it's not in the majority of cases. The majority of cases, you know, we get an order this week for delivery next week. And then, of course, you know, we get the availability issues, and that's why we get into conversations. Well, we haven't got this, but we can supply that instead.
Stephen, Richard, do you have anything to add to the idea of very long procurement times or even contract production times?
I have a slightly different take on this at the moment.
Okay.
the UK nurseries have swelled up their stock pre-Brexit. In October, November, December, an awful lot of stock came into the UK. So I actually think garden designers and plant choice out there potentially for the next 3 to 6 months could be the best it ever has been in certain areas because there's so much stock in the UK. But what happens when all the stock clears down and we can't bring in more material? I mean, we know the continent is sold out. So I actually think the real plant supply shortage will be this time next year. You know, I actually think there's going to be a real shortage of plants, hedging plants, spray roots this time next year. So I think this season, people may not see the whole ramifications of the impact of the last few months at the moment, but I think this time next year we will see a much deeper impact on availability and prices. So I think we're at the moment we're okay. Certain plants, certain trees are sold out, certain hedging is sold out. The demand around Europe's been huge, but I actually think UK nurseries source the bulk of their stock. Even the young plants are unrooted cuttings from the continent. All the pots come from the continent. The growing media, a lot of growing media and pots and fertilizers come from the continent. The labor comes from the continent. The only bit on a lot of UK plants is UK sunshine and UK water, you know. So I do think there's could be real shortage in a year and a half.
Okay, yeah, no, I think it's a good point, and it's worth considering further down the line that when you've got a glut at the beginning, it doesn't mean you'll have it permanently.
Yeah.
Steve, do you have anything to add on that?
I mean, I think we just need to, it's like one of the big designers used to be huge on Main Avenue in the 1990s. He still does these huge, beautiful projects around the UK and abroad. And he goes and shakes hands with someone, does a deal like he's going to design their estate or whatever. And he then visits looking for his specimen trees. And what I always think is so funny, he designs it completely after he's picked all his stock. And from the small to the big stuff, you know what I mean? And then the customer, we go to deliver the trees and they're absolutely thrilled. Think, how did he find such fantastic trees that just look so perfect in this location? But he designed the whole thing around the specimens. And so actually, our clients can make themselves look even better by doing it this way, and can actually be, you know, the customers won't think they blew it by not getting what they needed. They'll actually think they're really clever by doing it this way.
That's an interesting point. In fact, Kath Fletcher asked about what the designer can do to manage client expectation and how they can work with the nurseries. And obviously, I think, Kath, that's probably answered a lot of your question there, because, yeah, I mean, the perfect world, what you're selling is what you have in stock, and your clients are able to utilize that stock really effectively. But yeah, as Richard quite rightly points out, we may very well find that we have shortages after this glut, and as Robert points out, further down the line, our production will have to ramp up, and quite rightly so, in order to really, probably regain a lot of the ground that the UK lost over the last couple of decades in terms of plant production. So Mark, I'm going to jump over to you. So I've got an early question here that came in from Tim, which is asking about how disruptive it is for the RHS flower shows to be cancelled or postponed. This applies really to everyone on the panel in some respect, even if you're not directly supplying a garden. We all respond to some of the demands of it, and in fact we all definitely supply elements to show gardens. So with the RHS changing, obviously this is essentially a COVID question and probably more temporary rather than permanent. But is it going to affect us negatively, or are we able to rise to this challenge? So Mark, I'll start with you.
I think we can definitely rise to the challenge. I mean, like everything, there's good bits and bad bits to it. I mean, at last, I think, obviously Chelsea in September is great news from the point of view of actually getting back to some form of normality. It just makes you feel better for a start. I mean, I think what we did, I mean, this time last year, I just literally got back from looking at a job in Venice. And then you suddenly realise, that the pack of cards was about to go down big style, and that sudden awful realisation that there was no real end to it, or you couldn't see an end to it. was horrific, especially because, you know, shows, travel and events is my area of the business. So if there's anyone that hadn't got a job for the last year, that would be me. So it's having to go back to doing all the old stuff that I used to do. But I think it is some good news. I mean, the downside is, I mean, September is a fantastic, you know, we all know, obviously we're fairly heavy on shows and events, and we've done events every month of the year. I've been going to, there's a little trade fair, an international trade fair in Boskoop in Holland at the end of August. So the last 20 years I've gone there, and it's probably my favourite trade show of the year. It's not massive, but it's you know, Boskoop's where my granddad came from, and so I always feel like a bit of you is going home. And you've got all these growers and all that with all their new introductions and so on and so forth. And you know, it is a stunning time of year for plants. But of course, normally by September, people are showed out. Everyone's on holiday or just getting back from holiday. The gardens sort of, you know, going to, you know, being put back to bed, and everyone's gardens look great in May and June and not in September. So from the point of view of a different palette, it's really exciting. And one of my other favourite, I think my favourite show of all before that was the Malvern Autumn Show, where you've got, you know, which again was at roughly the same time. So the downside is it clashes with that. But the Malvern Autumn Show, you've got proper grain. It's a bit like Harvest Festival time, isn't it? With all the giant vegetables and everything else, and all that group of people. It's another area of the business altogether, but really, really fun. And of course, anything mixing horticulture and agriculture together makes everything a lot more fun again. So I'm very optimistic about it now. We're obviously the other thing we don't have to do is to go through a winter, you know, in between the show, because normally you get your list obviously, you know, 10 months or a year before, and you've got the winter to get through. So at least, you know, we know that July and August and September are the fastest growing months of the year for perennials, for the tricky part of it all. So I think it's good. I mean, it has been horrific. You know, perhaps they called it a bit too late. Well, I know they have called it too late up to now. You know, with Chelsea, then 2 Hamptons. And we are, you know, so we've all been battered about a little bit with all the anxiety of is it on or is it off. And I think we've had to make a decision to say, look, we know it's, you know, by watching Europe very carefully, we called it on all the shows long before they did, because we had to, you know, we've got other things to do and to try and bring some monies in elsewhere. But this time around, I think, you know, it's a great opportunity, and it's a time of year where, you know, some of the plants are saying that it's a whole new palette. So I'm very excited about it now at last.
Yeah, and I think that the challenge is something that personally I'm quite excited about, because it's not something we're prepared for. I think the growing season without having to use the winter is also interesting. But my question is going to be is trying to maintain plants that look happy and fresh and young rather than tired and burnt out at the end of summer.
Well, I think what's key is exactly that, is to forget about trying to hold on to anything. I mean, even ferns, if we keep getting this horrible frazzling, you know, this horrible hot June, which we have for the last 4 or 5 years, we've had anything from a month to 2 or 3 days of it being 100 degrees. Nothing is going to get through that and then still look okay afterwards. So what we've decided is that rather than hang on to stuff that may look all right in July or August and see if it looks better in September, is to just cut the whole lot off, start again in June and July with, you know, with big liners, get them potted, you know, later. Hold your nerve and start off with a completely new range of stock. Don't try and hang on to anything that's been hanging around since the spring. Definitely not. You know, by all means, cut stuff up and pot it on. But I think the key is to start afresh and acknowledge the fact that it's almost certainly going to be far too hot in June, which we know is going to happen. And for some reason, it doesn't seem to rain from March till June either anymore. So to have really nice fresh stock, I think that's the key, is to pot up late and have a whole new, and don't hang on to anything that might hang on. It's not worth it. The anxiety levels just get worse. So don't.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Steve, trees for September, Chelsea, easy?
Well, if they come and pick them now, yeah. I mean, some of the stuff's tagged already, but some people are still issues with sponsors, etc. as well. You know, that's the big problem. The sponsor, will it happen? Won't it happen? Will there be many people there? Won't there be many people there? It's, you know, I hate to be in Sue Big's, you know, job right now, because it must be a real struggle. You know what I mean? I'm glad it's, you know, but I think absolutely having Chelsea in September is the right thing to do, because even if it's not the grand Chelsea we normally have in May, it'll still be a great, you know, restarting the show seasons that we are also used to, and get people excited again. And I think people will go and they'll be fully booked up, I'm sure.
but just people are uncertain still.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Robert, do you have any take on the position with shows?
No, but other than what Marcus said, I think moving Chelsea to September will be really exciting because it's a different range and different palette of plants. And that's what I'm looking forward to more than anything else.
Yeah, fresh perspective.
Absolutely. No Laburna marches.
Richard, what do you feel? Is this an advantage? Are we doing the right thing? And are you going to enjoy the experience?
I think moving Chelsea to September could be fantastic for the industry. We're naturally busy in the spring anyway, because it's the spring, people get in their garden. And I think if people actually look at television in September time and look at a palette of plants that can make their gardens look amazing in the autumn and winter, I think it could open up people's eyes that a garden is just not for 4 months of the year when the sun is shining. I think if there's a really good plant choice at Chelsea for the autumn, I think people will see how amazing plants can be in the autumn. A garden is for 12 months of the year. People use it for 3, 4, 5. Huge demand in the spring when Chelsea is on, then it tails off. If we have Chelsea in the autumn, which we are going to, I think it's a phenomenal opportunity to educate everybody on the potential there is to use in the garden in the autumn, and people tend to switch off a little bit in the autumn. I think it has real positive vibe for the industry. You know, it'll be interesting to see how the gardens that are designed and submitted for Chelsea, how they can reinterpret those designs with autumn plants. So I think when we talk about people in the trade adapting their stock to availability, there'll be garden designers or gardens at Chelsea will be adapting their design to suit the time of the year. And I think that, you know, it could be really, really interesting. I actually think we might get a lot of very different gardens this year, because they'll have to deal with what's available and what's out there. They won't have a year or 2 years to plan it. So I think it could be a really interesting, challenging, yes, but rewarding, absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, we're running really very short on time, but there's two things that I want to cover. There was a very early question by Louise Bateman saying, where are the ladies in this discussion? Which I think is an interesting point. And as an all-male panel and a male interviewer, we probably are not as well represented as we should be. But I think there's a wider discussion to be had about the number of women in senior management positions within horticulture. That I think is probably something we should definitely look at in another discussion. I don't know if gents, if anyone you want to add anything to that, but I think it's something certainly that we need to look at.
Well, I have 5 managers and 4 of them are ladies, so there you go. Majestic is run by women. Yeah.
Why are we having to speak to you, Steve? We could be speaking to them. So, I mean, I think this is something that definitely we need to look at as an industry, and diversity is definitely an issue in general as an industry. But I think it's probably too long a discussion to have in the next 2 minutes that we've got. So it's for another one. Thank you, Louise, and we will respond to it. So I've got one final question that came in from Tim Grace, which segues into something that I was wanting to talk about anyway, which is it time that we established a national body specifically for the hardy stock industry to help coordinate the production and sale of stock in the UK, similar to what we find in Belgium and in Holland, in conglomerates possibly, but maybe more just the way of coordination. Just very recently, we've had the result of the AHDB levy, where particularly ornamental horticulture has basically said that they don't feel there's value in the levy and that we're not well represented. As you know, I've got a campaign discussing whether we need a Minister for Horticulture. Gents, very, very quickly, do you think we need to coordinate better as an industry, or are we all doing well enough on our own? Mark?
Well, I was hoping you were going to ask me last.
Oh, we can if you want, Steve.
No, that's okay. Well, I think our area, what we do, I think from our point of view, is fairly niche, and so I think you know, we never really sort of gone along much with the crowd. I totally understand. I think having a minister for horticulture would be brilliant, but having someone telling you what to grow and why and so size wise, it's probably not really for us, because we've always been more involved in more of a niche end of the market. So yeah. I'm not really qualified to answer that one.
No, interesting point. I think you're right that we want to maintain autonomy, but we just have more coordination in who we're producing and representation. Richard.
There is loads of organizations out there representing horticulture, and it's very hard to put us all into one basket. You know, there's tree surgeons, there's landscapers, there's production horticulture, there's amenity horticulture, golf course. We're all dealing with horticulture, but we all our specific roles are quite different needs. I think it would be we can be quite difficult to get to agree. If you get 4 people to agree to one decision in one room, that can be hard enough. If you've got 24 in a room or 124 in a room, I think it'd be very, very difficult to do. But I do think the outcome of it would be amazing if we all agree to work together, and it could actually open up UK horticulture. And I do think if we actually work together, we might make. We're lobbying government departments or the environmental agency, or lobbying government, and to get the results that we need as an industry may be a lot better. But you know, HTA and other organizations are working on some of these aspects, and NFU, or whatever the case may be. But you know, it would be very good if you had one voice, one louder voice with more grit.
Lovely, thank you. Robert, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, many years ago, we all the big tree growers in the country used to get together once a year and share the planting stock numbers. So there are about 10 or 12 big tree growers. We all used to say we planted so many acres and so many betula and try and forecast, you know, 5 or 6 years ahead to see where the surpluses or shortages would be in the market. But that was just a private enterprise attempt. Never really helpful, never really worked. So this kind of coordinated approach, if you even widen it out to more growers, will be even more difficult. And I think Rich is absolutely right. We all find and develop our own niche in the market that we're involved in, and manage our production according to what we expect our clients are going to need. There's one very interesting question which I'd like to answer very quickly, Lewis, if I may. From David Sutton saying, why haven't UK growers reacted to this demand for bigger stock? Why aren't UK growers producing more mature stock? Very simple answer to that is that historically, and I'm going back decades now, the demand for big stock in the UK has not been there. UK nurseries produced and sold small stock. On the continent, it was different. In Germany, for a century, they've had a demand for much bigger trees and much bigger stock in general. Therefore, a whole industry was developed to fulfill that demand. That hasn't been the case here. It's only the last 25 years where there's been a demand for much bigger stock. And in the middle of that, we had the financial crash, and prices for bigger stock collapsed because there was so much supply within Europe and very little demand. The second part answer to that question is that it comes down to cash flow. To grow bigger stock, you've got to sacrifice selling some of your existing stock. You've got to reserve it to grow it on for years in the future. And that takes a lot of cash. And that, I think, is the principal reason there's not enough cash in the industry to say, we're not going to sell all that stock this year. We're going to save it and sell it in 10 years' time. We're all trying to do little bits of that, but it's not enough to fully answer David's question.
No, it's an interesting point. I think space, money, and just a commitment to the future it's quite a difficult thing to do when you've got to actually focus on the now a lot of the time. Steve, what do you think about coordinated effort?
I mean, picking up what Robert just said, he's absolutely bang on. And the thing is, as well, people need to understand is the cost of machinery. I mean, some of these big stock will be lifted and replanted 7 times, and the machinery initially, you know, is a spade. You know, for the first time, and then you get into a small tree spade, and at the end you could be a machine that's £250,000, and you've had to have grown, and as Robert said, pay the workers, keep replanting it, not selling it, and keep on spacing out, getting bigger fields, more fields to get to the size. And of course, the price collapsed, like Robert says, in 2008. So a lot of big guys went bust. I mean, there's quite a few major German nurseries went bust, or some almost went bust. And so the price collapsed. Now the price is coming back. It may be viable to get back in the game. But of course, there's also a lot of, especially in Holland and Belgium, a lot of cooperatives where they actually work together, and they have different contractors that support them, lifting, planting, etc. So there's a real infrastructure of how they work together to make it happen. And because they're all, tighter areas, lots and lots of them together, it makes it like a center for growing trees, you could say.
Could we do that?
I think we could do, but it takes, I'm 60 years old. Maybe I'm the oldest person here, I'm not sure. But
no, you're not.
No comment.
I'm not planning to retire anytime soon, but we just talk about trees that need to, if I was to grow big trees like some of the stock I have here, I'd be 85, 90 before they're ready for market. I mean, that's quite a commitment, isn't it? And you could be enjoying that money, or you could just see it going into the future. So I mean, a lot of these big companies in the continent, and Robert's the 7th generation, all of us are 1st generation nurserymen, you know what I mean, as far as on our nurseries. So it's a lot of history in some of these nurseries, and the commitment and the investment they made. And I made a great return way in the past, but the last few years I haven't made any return. And hopefully now it comes back for them.
Right, well, thank you very much, gentlemen. That was a really interesting hour and a few minutes. And when we could have quite easily done this for another 5 or 6 hours, I'm sure. Lots to talk about. And I think there's lots to talk about in the future as well. And so hopefully this is something, again, we can revisit, at least, at the very least, just to catch up with you all. A reminder that on Tuesday, the 23rd of February, join Jim Wilkinson, 10 a.m. For a debate on porcelain paving. And it just remains for me to thank everyone listening today, and also my panel of Steve McCurdy, Robert Crowder, Richard McKenna, and Mark Straver, to say thank you very much for spending this hour with me. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye,
Really
everyone.
good.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us.